All right, let's look at the basics of Photoshop. When you start Photoshop up, you get this screen. Mine sees a lot of stuff I worked on in the past. Yours is probably blank-ish down here. And let's go to Create New. This thing opens up. Um, Now, everything on this side is just a bunch of presets for various purposes, which I have never used any of this, and we won't need any of this in the class. We'll just focus on what's over here on this side. Okay, this is where we actually make the document. Now, it's somewhat different in Photoshop than it was in Illustrator. In Illustrator, the document size is kind of irrelevant, or at least not that important. It's just like the size of the paper that you're printing on, say. Um, and since it was scalable art, right, vectors, you could make it any size at any time and it wouldn't matter, okay? But the document in Photoshop, rather than being just the page you're printing on, actually kind of is the thing, right? There isn't any separation between the document and the file you're making, if that makes sense. It's just it's just a rectangle of pixels, and as we work in it, we change the color of the pixels. So what that means is we kind of have to know the end uh, size that it's going to be printed at in order to start out with the right size document. Right? We have to start with the right resolution from the beginning. Okay. So if I'm doing a freelance job or something like that, the first thing I ask is how big are you going to want this? Um, so over here on this side, it might be you have pixels per inch, right? And this might be in pixels or it might be in inches. Okay. Um, and in terms of what pixels per inch to use, uh, it's it's a combination of how big it is, the dimensions, and how many pixels per inch adds the dimensions of the file by pixels. Okay, like customers will always say to me, "Oh, I want this at this or that pixels per inch," but they don't say how big they want it to be. So, a lot of computer artists just refer to something as like 3,000 by 2,400 or something like that, in the pixel dimensions, because that's a definite thing, as opposed to resolution, which is works in concert with the dimensions. Okay. Anyway, um, in terms of what resolution to use, technically speaking, the resolution is supposed to be 2.5 times the line screen that the printer is going to use if you were getting this printed like at an actual offset printer, like sending it out to a print job. In practice, I make every freelance job I do 300 pixels per inch, and nobody's ever complained about the resolution. It seems at the finished size. Okay, so so let's say we want a 4 by 4 inch document. Okay, so I'll make this 4 inches by 4 inches. All right, at 300 pixels per inch, and that's going to yield a document that's 1,200 by 1,200 pixels, right? So we can look at this in inches or pixels. Okay, so there's 1,200 by 1,200. The other stuff is not useful unless you're metric. Generally, we're going to want to be in either pixels or inches. Don't get them confused because they're obviously very different. If you make a document that's 4 by 4 pixels, it's really small. Okay, so let's create, and we get a white square. Now, before we go on, let's get in the right workspace. I reset mine, so I think yours should open up something like this. And as in Illustrator, there's different workspaces you can use. Up in the upper right here, there's a little pull down, and you can see that we're in Essentials. Okay. Um, and that's, I think, a fine one for us to work with. What I would always do is this libraries thing is of no use to us. It's rather annoying, so just close that up. Okay. And just make sure that your palettes are open here. I think they should be. All right. And over on the left side, I usually prefer the toolbar to be a double row. Now, this is another thing with the toolbar. This is a recent change that was also made to Illustrator. It used to be when you were in different workspaces, it was just a different arrangement of palettes, and all the tools always stayed in the same place. Now they have it in a different workspace. Different tools are available and unavailable, and they move around. I think this is a bad idea because the toolbar, you kind of get used to always going back for quickly and grabbing your tools. And palettes, you're kind of always used to them in different places or moving them around. So I don't know. I don't like that, but um, let's just work with essentials. Now, if you happen to like, you can drag your palettes and move them around and stuff like that. And if you say, okay, I want to put it back the way it was, if you go up here and just say essentials, it kind of like updates essentials to uh, be the way that you made it. So to put it back to what essentials was, you have to actually go reset essentials. Okay, and then I gotta close that and do this over here. All right. Okay. So so now we're in the workspace and we have our 5 by 5 inch, or no, it was 4 by 4 inches at 300 pixels per inch document. Now this, how big this looks in Photoshop um, doesn't mean anything. All right, the size that it looks here, it just shows it. It just fits it on the screen. Okay, this could be a mile wide or an inch wide. You don't know from looking at it. The only way you really know, okay, and to check your resolution is go image, image size, okay, and that gives us actually this same thing that we had on when we were creating our document, right? So if I wanted to, if we could change this to inches here, okay, 4 by 4 at 300, right? Now let's just look at this for a minute here. 4 by 4 inches at 300 pixels per inch. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is when we created the new document, the choice was RGB or CMYK. Generally, you want RGB. Okay, CMYK is for when you're finally sending something out to be printed or something. I always work in RGB, and I always give files to my customers in RGB, and it's fine. Okay. It's a larger color gamut. RGB is also known as 24-bit color. 16.4 million colors, okay, which is plenty. CMYK is a somewhat smaller collection of colors comprised of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Anyway, so 4 by 4, 300 pixels per inch in RGB color space, okay, yields a document that's 4.12 megabytes. That's what that is up here. That's 1200 by 1200 pixels. All right. Now, an important thing is this resample checkbox. This is here if we want to change the size of our document. If it's unchecked, right, and if I make the length and width are locked together here. So if I make it 2 by 2, okay, then the resolution becomes doubles. All right. If resample is not checked, it does whatever it has to do to maintain 1200 by 1200 pixels because we're not resampling, we're not changing anything. If I make it 1 by 1 inch, it's 1200 pixels per inch. Okay. If I make it 10, it's 120 pixels per inch. So I'm going to put this back to 4 because that was a reasonable place. Now, if I turn on resample and make this half, okay, then it becomes 600 by 600 pixels. So we're actually throwing information away then. Okay. Put it back to 4. So anyway, so that's how we image size. Most often you're using that just to find, once you're working on something, just to find out how big it is, right? So I'm going to say cancel because I'm not actually changing anything here. Now, one other thing, let's say you want to add more space on the right side of your document. If I go image size, okay, and if I were to like go to inches here, I promise we'll do something more interesting in a minute. I just want to get this out of the way. With resample on, if I uncheck this, okay, and make the width 6, all right, so, and say, okay, now, now I added 2 more inches, all right. But the problem is if that was a photograph or something, it would have stretched the image, okay? So I'm going to undo that because usually you don't want to stretch the image. I just wanted more canvas space to work on. So that is image canvas size, okay, right next to image size. And here, I'm going to put it to inches again. Let's make the width 6, all right? This will actually leave what we have alone. It's kind of hard to tell because it's just a white box at the moment, and add on in the background color. This right here, which we'll talk about in a minute, that black swatch, is the background color. Let me just change it to something else, something more obvious. So image canvas size, and what I say, I'm going to make it 6, right? And here, this little odd looking thing here is, if I just leave it the way it is, it'll add 1 inch to either side. If I click here, it'll add the 2 inches to the right side. And I can go, if I change the height, I can click the tops and bottoms also. Okay, so if I go like this, and now you can see there's, I made my document bigger without stretching this one. All right, let's undo that. Now, in terms of our colors, all right, in Illustrator, it was fill and stroke, right? And you always had to make sure the correct one was in the front. But in Photoshop, it's foreground. The one that's currently white on mine is called the foreground color, and the red one is called the background color, okay? And neither one comes to the front, okay? You're generally working with the foreground color. You can swap the 2 colors with this little arrow right here. Now, obviously, background isn't exactly, you know, the name isn't exactly right because clearly the background of this file isn't red, right? So it's really just think of it as paint color and other paint color, right? There's certain situations where this kind of, like if you were working on a 1-layer document and you were to erase the pixels on that layer, it would, in certain situations, it would show this. But most often there's a lot of things that you're doing with Photoshop that require 2 colors, and by default it will often use foreground and background. But that's what they've always been called. So, and to change the color, you can just click on it, and it gives you the standard Adobe color picker, right? And you can click on any of these little buttons here to change the configuration, and it all makes sense the way it works. But honestly, the default way is how I usually work it, and that's fine. So what that means is the hue is in this slider here, right? And saturation and blackness is in this field, okay? And if it's up in this corner, you got to pull the actual colors, the dot that's out in the field here. All right. Now, so let's use a little bit of colors. So in this workspace, it should be the 3rd down on the left side of the toolbar, the paintbrush. Okay. So let's get that thing, and you should be able to just drag and paint. Okay. Now, whatever tool you're in, there's some other things that look like paintbrushes around on the screen. It should be just called brush tool, right? Whatever tool you're in, you'll see a toolbar across the top that shows the controls for that tool, okay? So hopefully you're able to paint. If you want to change the size, so you probably have the soft default brush. I'm just hitting Control-Z and undoing it. Now, normally you'll notice the layer palette here, and after today, we'll always be painting on a transparent layer above the background. But for the moment, we're just painting right on the background. And if I want to get rid of it, I'm just going to do Control Z. So to change the size of the brush and how fuzzy it is, if you just right click on the screen, here's size, all right? And the brushes is not in some kind of unit of measure that's relative to our paint size, okay? I guess you could say it's in pixels, right? So if you do a 5,000 pixel brush and try to paint, you're not even going to see the brush. See, it colored my whole document because the brush is actually bigger than the size of the file or somewhere near there. So, but I can go down to really small, right? And the hard here, this is a soft brush, and so I'm just right clicking, right? If I turn the hardness up, I get a hard edge on the brush. All right. Now, what I usually do is I find it's, this is a little bit old school, but I find it when I'm painting a lot or working, I find it annoying to right click and open this thing all the time to make these changes, because I seem to want to change the brush size very often. So if you look at your keyboard, over on the right side, there's a bracket key, just to the right of the letter P, all right? And the right bracket key makes it bigger, and the left bracket key makes it smaller, okay? All right, so I use that thing all the time. Okay, it's a good shortcut. All right, or you can just right click. Yeah, there's looking up at the paintbrush, there we looked at our size. This right here is the brush palette, which is a whole lot of stuff to deal with that we'll look at another time when we can take a deep dive into it. Okay, I'm just looking at the controls of the paintbrush before we go on. Where it says mode normal, all right, these are blending modes, okay, which are found in Photoshop, and it's they're found in a number of different places, on layers, on anything that you're painting with, different places like that. And they're basically the names of algorithms that decide how the color you're painting with is going to interact with what's below it, all right? So normally just leave it on normal, okay? But as an example, let's see, if I make some colors here, and then I paint with, let's say, black, all right? If I set my paintbrush blending mode to lighten, okay, it's not going to put anything down because black is darker than everything, all right? Actually, let me change it to, let me paint with red, okay, and lighten. All right, so you can see it puts some red down here because maybe the red's a little bit lighter than this blue, but nothing on the white. All right, if I change it to darken, okay, it's going to put it there, and it still puts some on the blue because I'm not doing a very good job of demonstrating this. Okay, there's some mixing of the color there. Let me try and multiply. So anyway, it's not the perfect example, but here you can see how darken with this color works over white, but not over black, right? Because it's not darker than black. Anyway, those are just the, we will actually be using those in the future a few times, and we'll look at them more carefully. But for the moment, just keep it on normal, all right? And your opacity, you can turn that down if you want to make less opaque or more transparent paint, okay? And flow is, well, actually, before I go on to that, if you want to get rid of, if you've made a lot of junk and you want to get rid of it, right? In Illustrator, we could have just selected everything and hit the delete key, right? But there is no things here. We're just changing the colors of pixels. So we need to flood the canvas with paint, all right? And you can go edit, fill. And by the way, when you're up here in the main menu, and you look down the right side, if there's a keyboard shortcut, it's down the right side here. So you can see that Shift F5 is a shortcut to fill, all right? And I can fill with black or with white or foreground and background color, a variety of things. I'm just going to fill with white. Okay. All right. Anyway, opacity and flow look kind of the same when you turn, but when you turn one down or the other one down, they work slightly differently. So like, let's say I turn the opacity down and I'm painting with this one color. And when I run over the same spot, no matter how long I run over it, it doesn't get any darker than that 26% I'm using. I have to let go of the mouse to get it darker, okay? Oops. But if I turn that up and I turn flow down, turn it down a little bit more. Okay, flow on a single stroke will get darker. All right. And the little airbrush thing next to flow means it will continue to put down paint even if you stop moving. See, like that. And there's a bunch of other stuff here that there's symmetry and some things. I think these things, I just want to look at the basics at the moment. So when we go into the brush palette, we can look at some of this other stuff also. In terms of navigating around, right? Turn this stuff back up. It's pretty much the same in Illustrator as it was in Illustrator, right? You get the zoom tool there, and you can just click and drag to zoom in or zoom out. Okay. And when you zoom in, you use the space bar to pan around. And if you want to zoom out in one shot, you just double click on the hand button. Okay. I find that quicker than trying to zoom back out to fit perfectly on the screen again. All right. There's also a navigation palette, window, navigator, okay, which you can scroll the thing and it drags around like this. I don't know why anybody would want to use that because it's not really simpler, I don't think. So there are, just since I didn't really mention it, like in Illustrator, there's plenty of palettes that aren't showing here. And if you're looking for one, you can find it in here, right? Undoing things, right? Now this changed in the last version of Photoshop, okay? If I do Control Z, it used to be in Photoshop, if you did Control Z, it would undo, and if you did Control Z again, it would redo, and you had to hold down Control Alt Z to back up multiple steps. I don't know why they did it that way. It's undoing is more memory intensive in Photoshop than it is in Illustrator because it has to remember for each undo all of the information for every pixel. Plus, it wants to be able to hold at least, I think, 2 or 3 copies of the file in RAM to be able to run certain effects and things like that. So, Photoshop is much more memory intensive than Illustrator was. Not computationally, but it has to hold a lot of information. So the number of undos is generally limited. I think it was set to 20 or something like that. And I think maybe the default is something like 100. Actually forget, something I never change. But if we go to edit preferences, let's see if it's under general. I forget where it is. So I went under performance, and I think history states is 50, right? So that's the number of undos you have, and that's plenty, really. So Control Z to undo, Control-Shift-Z to redo, okay? Just like Illustrator. And let's look briefly at selecting things, all right? Now, since you're frequently working with just say a photograph or something like that, and there's no objects like in Illustrator, you have to be able to find a way to get hold of things on the canvas to, if you're retouching, to get rid of the old spouse and stick in the new spouse, or whatever it is you're trying to do, paint the hose off the lawn or something. So we need a lot of selection tools. Let's look at and this is another thing we'll go into in greater detail, but let's look at the most basic one. It should be top right there, the rectangular marquee tool, just to see how selections work. All right. So if I drag a rectangle with it, all right, and now I'm going to go and paint. And you will see that you can only paint inside the rectangle. Okay. If I go back to my rectangular marquee tool, I can move it around. It doesn't move the contents. It just moves the marquee. Okay. The little dotted line of marching ants is referred to as a marquee. Okay. I guess because somebody thought it looked like the old movie theater where the dotted lights would go around the thing with the name of the movie on it or something. But anyway, that's the marquee. If you actually want to move the contents, then that's the move tool, top left on the toolbar. Okay. And here's a case where the background color actually functions as the background. When I'm on a single layer, see, here's my layer palette over here, background layer. If I move stuff away, it reveals that color. To get rid of this selection, like let's say I want to go back to painting, on the whole thing, you go select, deselect. Okay, now I can paint anywhere again. So that's a simple selection. See if I think of anything. Yeah, I think that we'll go, that's just a very basic introduction, but that's good for the moment, and then we'll go in and look at things in greater detail next.